Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the main quest in Fallout 3. More specifically, does it make sense? To do that, we should begin with a basic rundown of the main quest line. With this, we begin with you being woken up in Vault 101 by your best friend, Amata, who happens to be the daughter of the Overseer. This being a very different start to the day compared to the previous days in the vault. Your dad has escaped, leaving you in the vault by yourself, without any note or warning of his departure. The Overseer was not exactly the happiest about your dad leaving to get the clean water, but hey, what was he going to do about it? Kill Jonas, your dad's assistant. This prompts your own quest to escape the vault, which will lead you to the Overseer's office. This is where you obviously will find the Overseer, and also his daughter. As you walk towards the Overseer's office, you hear the Overseer interrogating Amata about where you, the Lone Wanderer, has gone. With this, previous choices come into play. Did you take the 10mm pistol that Amata offered you, or did you let her keep it? If she kept it, then she will shoot Officer Mack and flee from the room. Whereas if you took it, well, it is your time to shine. Amata will also flee the room and you will have to fight Officer Mack instead. In this, there is also the choice on whether or not to essentially get rid of the Overseer of this vault during your escape. After your escape, this leads to the next part of the main quest, finding your dad. This is where you head to Megaton. In your search for your father, you will head to the great city in the wastes, which for some reason has no nearby water supply, but it does have an undetonated warhead in the center. That's an interesting town feature to have, but hey, gotta have something to bring in the tourists. Here you head to the saloon, looking for the owner, Colin Moriarty. With a little bit of work, this will eventually point you to head out of Megaton and into the ruins of Washington, D.C. However, you find that getting there was no walk in the park, unless that park was a super mutant-infested post-apocalyptic cityscape. This is where you have your first run-in with the Brotherhood of Steel, and also a super mutant behemoth. With your help, the Brotherhood of Steel take down the super mutants and their behemoth friend. This is where you meet the radio announcer, Three Dog, which leaves you with a dilemma. Do you help him by going on a quest to get him a radio dish, which leads to him giving you the information, or do you get rid of him and take the information that way? Whatever the Lone Wanderer does, it leads you to Rivet City, the city inside of an old ship. Here you head to the labs in search for Dr. Lee, who will send you off on the search for your father, starting where the former Project Purity was, at the Jefferson Memorial. After searching here, you don't actually find your father. Instead, you find his notes. These tell you where you may find your father. Let's checkpoint this. So far, does the main quest of Fallout 3 make sense? Throughout the first part of the main quest, you are abandoned by your father and forced to leave the only place you ever considered home at the age of 19, barely an adult by some standards. You also start to find out that your whole life may actually have been an elaborate lie. Every single person in the vault potentially lied to you. You were not born there, neither was your father, so most of your childhood was just a sidestepping of the truth. The Overseer's slight overreaction and decision to interrogate and get rid of anyone that could have helped your father also hints at the experiment within Vault 101. The Overseer being given complete and utter power over the vault and everyone in it. When has that sort of thing ever gone wrong? James, your father, knew what the Overseer of this vault was like, and how he may have been considered a bit of a tyrant with some of his past behavior. So him leaving without warning, bringing you with him, or even providing something to defend yourself with, in the worst case scenario, does not make sense, as it is likely the Overseer would have taken out his anger on those who were close with your father, being you and his assistant Jonas, winding up dead because of this. So this does not really make sense, unless your father has no thought or consideration for anyone but himself. Heading to the nearest city or civilization could be considered sensible, as well, how else are you going to find information on where your father went? As it is likely he went there too, if it was close. He would also need supplies to live in the wastes, so do you. The problem lies, however, in you knowing where it is, while having an inkling into the location due to the marker on your compass. How would you have any idea where anything outside of the vault is if you had not been out of the vault recently? Moving on to 3 Dog. With this, it is understandable him being hesitant to give you information without something in exchange. As in the society of Fallout, you can either trade favors or items, all caps. With this, he sees doing a quest for him worth the same weight as providing the information he has on the missing father. So this makes sense. Now we jump to Rivet City with Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee does send you in the wrong direction when it comes to the search for your father. However, for good reason, because he never actually came back to the Rivet City labs after he made the decision to search for Vault 112. He decided to go it alone and not tell anyone about his plans. I wonder if he's done that before. So this does make sense. Overall, this first checkpoint makes more sense than not, with the main problems being your father's questionable decision-making processes and whether or not the compass should show areas of interest. Now let's jump into perhaps one of the stranger vaults of Fallout 3, Vault 112. Following the suggestion of his holotapes, you arrive at the vault to be greeted by a robo-brain. Now this vault was different from your home sweet home Vault 101. There were no people walking around, just robots taking care of the other so-called vault dwellers who have made their homes in these strange pods. With the desire to find your dad, you join everyone else in these Visitron lounges. But not everything is as it seems. It feels as if you have stepped back in time before the bombs had ever dropped, and before colored television ever existed. Everything here is black and white. However, Tranquility Lane, the simulation within Vault 112, is not that simple. Here you are transported back into the body of a child, and on your initial exploration of this small neighborhood, your father is nowhere to be seen. However, a small girl by the name of Betty claims to know where he has gone. But as per usual, information does not come freely. So you, as a lone wanderer, can either go along with Betty's little plans, which involve several escalating events, from making little Timmy cry, breaking up a marriage, all the way to murdering all of the residents of Tranquility Lane. However, if following an evil little girl's plans is not your cup of tea, there are always other options for the lone wanderer to take. The lone wanderer can follow the advice of Old Lady Dithers and trigger the failsafe, ultimately destroying the experiment and revealing the true identity of Betty that Dithers hinted at. Either way, once the failsafe is triggered, or once you have done little Betty's bidding, you will find that the lovely little dog that has watched whatever atrocities you committed is not some computer-generated dog, but it is actually your father. As you and your father leave the chaotic mess of Tranquility Lane and Vault 112 behind, you head to Rivet City to lab to get the team back together. However, this is no Scooby-Doo episode, where the monster is just an evil robot. No, there is more to the Enclave than that. Plus, there is more of you than in Scooby-Doo, and Dogmeat doesn't speak anything but, well, dog. But anyway, your father manages to convince Dr. Madison Lee, even with her reservations, that they should start Project Purity back up again. So you hit the road again, heading to the Jefferson Memorial. Yet again, your time to shine, clearing out Jefferson Memorial of super mutants. As with the time your father and the other scientists have spent away from it, well, it's gotten a little infested with these pesky creatures. But hey, your dad finally realized that you were handy for something, even if that is as an exterminator and a little errand runner with getting things reset up, draining the intake pipes for your father to help get it functioning again. Heading back into the control room, you see it has become a lot less productive and a lot more hostile. We see another group has joined the scientists in Project Purity. These visitors are the Enclave led by Colonel Augustus Autumn. You, along with Dr. Lee and a few others, are locked out of the main room. However, you can see and hear your father and several members of the Enclave discussing the hostile takeover of Project Purity. Your father told the Enclave that they have no authority over the water purifier. And of course, everyone reacted like calm, level-headed adults. The end. Not. Your father deciding to make a martyr of himself by flooding the chamber with radiation, as a small act of revenge, killing off the majority of the members of the Enclave in the chamber. With your father's act of martyrdom, let's checkpoint this. So does this part of the Fallout 3 main quest make sense? Starting from Vault 112. Does keeping people alive on invisible life support, as we cannot see any sort of breathing tubes, any form of cannula to get fluids, foods, or even medications, and no real way of keeping them asleep, work? Also, as we age without movement, you can essentially waste away. Considering these people were in their Visitron lounges for just over 202 years, without taking into account their age going into these special pods, they would have been, well, incredibly old, requiring large amounts of life support and just general support that the robo-brains would have been unable to give. And there is no evidence of this support if you look inside at those in the lounges. So no, Vault 112 does not make sense. As with how the vault is set up, it has no real way to actually support people to live in these lounges for prolonged periods of time, let alone 202 years. Moving on to Project Purity and the hostile takeover. Starting with getting Project Purity set back up. Considering this is what your father abandoned you, his child, for, leaving them in a dangerous situation in the vault, it makes sense to get back to work on his former project. Considering the project had been essentially decommissioned for about 19 years, it makes sense that much of the area was infested by super mutants, but sending in someone who is barely an adult to deal with some of the harder creatures to get rid of in the capital wasteland. But hey, when has your father been a responsible parent? So this behavior is questionable to say the least. Also, sending your kid who has no clue about the purifier to mess with the parts of the machine sounds like dad of the year. However, this is where a lot of the real problems begin. After you are done playing mechanic for the purifier and heading back up to see the Enclave meeting with a team, the issue comes from both sides, with the Enclave initially attempting a peaceful-ish takeover, however refusing to listen to your father's explanation that hey, the water purification system doesn't purify water currently. Instead, Colonel Autumn resorting to a display of violence by killing one of the scientists, Janice, as a warning to your father. Not to be outdone, your father deciding to demonstrate just how non-functional the water purifier was. So what does not make sense here is several things. 1. Colonel Autumn's refusal to listen. By refusing to listen and killing one of the scientists who may have been a vital part in getting the machine to work, unbeknownst to him, as he doesn't really know who is who, he risked not only his own life, but the lives of the people working for him, resulting in the deaths of several Enclave soldiers. If Janice had been a vital part in getting the machine operational, there was a potential for the water purifier to never actually work. What also does not make sense is James, your father, desire to die by demonstration of how poorly the machine works. This would also cause damage to the machine and also stop anyone from accessing the main area safely due to radiation. Essentially, if I can't have the water purifier, no one else can. He damaged the project he left the vault for and died in the process, making his child an orphan. Because hey, again, parent of the year. This still did not save Project Purity from the Enclave at this stage, considering, again, the Enclave would take over the Jefferson Memorial, so his efforts, even though they could not take the scientists alive, were somewhat in vain. Instead of finding out what the Enclave wanted and discussing how to best make the project work for both groups, both Colonel Autumn and your father in this situation chose to resort to death, which does not make sense since in both cases it benefits no one. The machine is damaged beyond function currently, and many lives are lost on both sides, along with the entirety of the experiment in Vault 112 keeping people alive in the simulation for over 202 years, with no real result or actual experiment to test. Overall, this part of the main quest does not make sense. Now, it is time to move on and make our escape from the Enclave, considering that you, the Lone Wanderer, is realistically the only one here who can fight. There is no point sticking around until the last man standing. So where do you run to? The Brotherhood of Steel, of course. They were the former supporters of Project Purity 19 years ago, and they also hate the Enclave. However, in the tunnels on the way to see the Brotherhood of Steel for help and shelter, Dr. Lee stops the group and tells you to cough up 5 Stimpaks because Gaza, one of the people she brought along, has a heart condition, which happens to be exacerbated by stressful situations, which you're in. With this, you have several options. You can give him the Stimpaks to help with his heart, give him Buff Out to essentially calm him down, you can leave him behind by convincing Dr. Lee or Gaza that it's best, or you can kill him. Whatever you choose to do, you can continue on to the Citadel and sit through an argument between Dr. Lee and Paladin Bale. This is until Dr. Lee yells at Owen Lyons over the intercom to let her in. After being let into the Citadel, Lyons begins his questioning of Dr. Lee, asking for the rundown of why they are at his doorstep. And this is also where Dr. Lee asks for his help. Eventually, whilst in the Citadel, you get access to the pre-war computers, specifically their computer featuring information about Vault-Tec and their vaults. This is where you find information about all of the vaults in the capital wasteland region. The most important in this case being Vault 87. This leads you to find Scribe Rothschild to find more information about this vault. You learn about the danger of the main entrance of this vault, which is the lethal levels of radiation. However, you also learn that this vault has another way to enter, this being through a cavern known as the Lamplight Caverns. After heading to the Lamplight Caverns, you find they are not empty. Instead, you find a small town by the name of Little Lamplight, inhabited by only children. Depending on your perks, you may be able to charm your way through the gate with the Child at Heart perk, or even a speech check. However, this will not always be successful with Mayor McCready. If you fail, or if you are feeling exceptionally brave, you can go and save some of the missing members of Little Lamplight from Paradise Falls, the slaver settlement. Either way, you find your way into Little Lamplight. This also leads to more decisions about how you will enter Vault 87. Do you choose Murder Pass, the super mutant infested tunnel connecting the cavern and the vault, or do you choose to get the power restored and hack your way into the vault? Whatever your decision, you make your way into Vault 87. This is where it starts to get even more bizarre. Instead of an abandoned vault, you find that Vault 87 is inhabited, but not by people. Turns out these super mutants are also present in the vault, the majority of them being hostile, until you meet Forks, a rather intelligent super mutant, willing to aid you in your quest to get the Gek and get out of Vault 87. With the help of Forks or your own stubbornness along with a radiation suit, you manage to get the Gek. With the Gek in hand, and potentially your new friend, you manage to escape Vault 87. Well, almost. You were in the home stretch, with freedom in sight. Then you were knocked out by an Enclave soldier. In your dazed state, the same man who was present when your father died, Colonel Autumn, would walk in, taking you and the Gek with him to the Enclave base. When you wake up inside of the Enclave base, you are confronted by Colonel Autumn, who interrogates you over how to get the water purifier working. With this, you have several options. You can either give him the right code, refuse to give him a code, or give him the wrong code. If you did not give the correct code to Colonel Autumn, this leads to your conversation with President Eden, which of course was no walk in the park to get to, considering that Colonel Autumn ordered your death. But at least President Eden stuck up for you by having his robots kill anyone who may cause you harm. Eventually, you do get to President Eden, and this leads to your decision. Do you destroy the robot president, or do you leave him be? Either way, you will have to take the modified FEV to leave the base, leaving you to ponder whether or not you should do the Enclave's bidding. Once you leave the base, the Brotherhood of Steel arrive, with most of the action already taken care of. The job at Raven Rock is mainly getting out of there. After a quick pit stop at the Citadel to resupply and prepare Liberty Prime, it is time to head out. With this, you enter through the gift shop at Jefferson Memorial. Once in the rotunda, along with Sarah Lyons, the door will lock, and once again, here comes Colonel Autumn, who, being your enemy, will try to start a fight. With this, you can either decide to fight him, or you can convince him that the water purifier is not worth fighting for. After finishing your business with Colonel Autumn, you can head up to the water purifier. However, the water purifier has been damaged, and is about to self-destruct. So someone has to sacrifice themselves to save the water purifier and everyone in the area. With this, you can either send a companion in, especially if they are immune to radiation, like Forks. However, they can actually refuse. You could also send Sarah Lyons in, or go in yourself. With this, you can also complete an optional quest if you decided to side with President Eden. You can use that little vial of the FEV and dump it into the water purifier. If you decide to sacrifice yourself and die, well, you should have due to the high levels of radiation. Forks, being a super mutant, would have been unaffected, and Sarah, well, she's a human like you, she would have met the same fate. We have reached our next checkpoint. So does this part of the main quest make sense? Well, let's break it down. Seeking assistance from the enemy of the Enclave, which is the Brotherhood of Steel, makes sense. They previously helped to protect those working at Project Purity during its initial attempt. However, what does not make sense about the second run-through is Gaza. Bringing Gaza, who has a severe heart condition, which is worsened by stress, Jefferson Memorial has always had issues with super mutants, which would have been stressful for him without even having to encounter the Enclave. Personally, I would not bring my grandparents into a situation where it's like, hey look, dangerous creatures. I am not trying to catch my grandma when she faints. So why would I bring someone who has a severe heart condition into that sort of situation? Especially when he is not the most helpful with Project Purity, considering you kind of do his job anyway. So having him there makes no sense. Considering the reluctance to let you and the others who survived the Enclave's attack on Project Purity into the Citadel, it is interesting and a little odd how fast they were to aid the Lone Wanderer in their quest to find the Gek, as well as give them training in power armor. This is especially strange considering the Brotherhood of Steel's rules against outsiders, which is why their helpfulness does not make sense. Yes, you may have helped them in the past. However, the Brotherhood of Steel are often not the type to help others without seeing something in return. Considering that the water purifier was in the hands of the Enclave at the point of them helping you, and the Enclave had better armor and weapons, they weren't exactly the most willing to just go pick a fight with them previously unless they knew they would win. Also considering that Project Purity required a Gek to be functional, which is a piece of pre-war technology that the Brotherhood were unlikely to have previously gotten their hands on, it is unlike them to let you collect it alone and to also let it be used without some form of research on the device first. So much of the Brotherhood of Steel's involvement does not make sense considering they allowed you to access their technology, however were not monitoring or following you whilst you got the Gek. Nor did they take it and research it. Moving on to the Lamplight Caverns and Little Lamplight, town with only children inside of it. Already this place makes absolutely no sense, leaving us with more questions than answers. How do the children get to Little Lamplight? And at what age do children just get sent there? Where do the children even come from? And other than cave mushrooms, what do they actually eat? There are no answers for any of these questions, making Little Lamplight a strange place that does not make sense. Moving on to Vault 87. In Vault 87 you encounter super mutants. All but one of these are hostile. This makes sense as FEV, the virus that causes super mutants, can cause hostility and, well, losing intelligence. Based on the Vault and what we know about it, these super mutants are no accident. They are actually the test subjects of Vault 87, some of them being Vault dwellers, others being unlucky wasteland explorers that came a little too close to the Vault. So the presence of super mutants within this Vault makes sense, considering the creation was essentially the experiment. Moving on to you, the Lone Wanderer getting kidnapped by the Enclave. This makes sense as they believed that the Lone Wanderer was the key to understanding the water purifier and getting the machine working, which is technically true. Depending on your choice when it comes to the Enclave, if you give Colonel Autumn the code, he repays you by getting rid of you. This also makes sense as he sees the Lone Wanderer as a threat. He has the risk of the Lone Wanderer coming back with the Brotherhood to fight them over the water purifier. The ordering of the death of the Lone Wanderer for going to meet with the President, Eden, also makes sense due to Colonel Autumn not wanting FEV to be released into the water, which he was concerned that the Lone Wanderer may be convinced to do this. When it comes to President Eden and how you deal with him, considering 3 of the options are essentially convincing him to self-destruct, these do not make sense. It should be a lot harder to trigger the self-destruct sequence in the computer that is supposed to be the president. Now we reach the end of the main quest. Die or to send someone else to do it. Considering with this, whoever entered the water purifier does not in fact die, they just sleep for 2 weeks. This does not make any sense, as high levels of radiation cause death. So the current ending of Fallout 3 makes no sense. So does this part of the main quest make sense? Well, considering the overly helpful but incredibly hands-off nature of the Brotherhood in this part of the quest, especially their lack of desire to examine a Gek, this does not make sense. Yes, the Brotherhood may gain control over the water purifier, however the water purifier initially being in the hands of the Enclave, who are their enemy, their willingness to help does not make sense at this time. Moving on to Little Lamplight, the town of children. This just does not make sense. A town of just children with no explanation of where the children are coming from or why it is necessary. With Vault 87 being full of super mutants, this actually makes sense, as this is based on the experiments that were housed there. The reason for that experiment is another story. Colonel Autumn's behaviour towards the Lone Wanderer does somewhat make sense, as this was partially him following orders, also his concern over President Eden going behind his back and releasing the FEV through the Lone Wanderer. However, what does not make sense is how many options and opportunities there are for self-destructing President Eden. As someone who is supposed to be leading the government of the United States, he should not have so many vulnerabilities, especially considering he is a computer. Another thing that does not make sense is the fact you survive the radiation after sacrificing yourself to save the water purifier. Yes, in the original base game, I believe this was the end, but it changed so that you just slept for 2 weeks. Overall, the final part of the Fallout 3 main questline does not make sense. But does the entire main quest of Fallout 3 make sense? For that, we will have to analyze our previous checkpoint conclusions. Starting with the first checkpoint. Although your father abandoning you for some project he has not worked on in the past 19 years, nor has anyone who was part of the project asked for him to come out of hibernation to restart Project Purity, let alone spoken to anyone who has worked on it, leaving you in danger with an overseer who was drunk on power and quick to anger, his sudden behavior to just leave the vault and the whole reason he went into the vault makes no sense. However, the other major parts of this specific checkpoint make sense, with Three Dog being willing to trade a favor for a favor, and Dr. Lee pointing you in the wrong direction. Not because of her own issues, but of course because of your father's inability to tell anyone where he was going and why. Moving on to the middle section, your father's involvement. Vault 112 and its experiment do not make any sense. With the vault not having any actual testable hypothesis, nor does it have any evidence of actual life support for the members of the vault, it is unlikely that the Visitron loungers could have supported the vault dwellers inside of the simulation for over 200 years, considering the amount of care that is needed for life support, and these people would have been on it. The next part of the section is of course the takeover of Project Purity. There are several issues with this. Firstly, of course, being Colonel Autumn's behavior. Killing a member of the team whilst your father was attempting to explain to him that the water purifier was not functional. However, your father was also problematic, in the sense that his reaction was not compatible with the information that he had. If he was actually stalling, firstly, your father would not have known who the Enclave were, especially considering that they did not introduce themselves as such. They instead claimed themselves to be the United States government. He also would not have known what their plans were for the water purifier. His knowledge of anything to do with the Enclave is incredibly unlikely if you consider the fact he had spent the last 19 years inside of Vault 101 and the Enclave's previous actions were on the other side of the former United States of America. With this is the first time the Enclave have interacted with Project Purity, as all previous attacks had come from super mutants, not the Enclave. So this entire part of the main quest does not make sense. Now moving into the main questline after your father's death. The Brotherhood of Steel were not initially welcoming to the surviving members of Project Purity, initially refusing them entry into the safety of the Citadel. This changing after Dr. Lee of course yelled at Elder Lyons through the intercom. This then led to them being let in. However, with this lack of warm welcome, you would expect for them to not be so helpful with the desire to continue Project Purity, especially considering they would not be getting much in return at the moment, and they would be going against their much stronger enemy, the Enclave. However, they agreed, which does not make sense. There was no guarantee of the Brotherhood of Steel getting access to the water purification system, so this would not have been a worthwhile risk in the opinion of many, which is why it does not make sense. With the assistance of the Brotherhood, you find out the safe way to access Vault 87. A vault with the necessary GEC is through Lamplight Cavern, and of course Little Lamplight. The town that makes absolutely no sense because why raise children when you can leave them in a cavern? I am sure your father James may have considered it. At least Vault 87 makes sense, as the experiment that was being conducted in the vault, well, it has the result roaming the halls. The super mutants here have no reaction to the high levels of radiation in various parts of the vault and at the main entrance, so it is a perfect environment for them. Colonel Autumn's behavior also is one of the few things that makes sense towards the end, with this being a mix of orders from higher ups, this being President Eden, but also his desire not to end everyone living in the capital wastelands. His behavior to attempt to get rid of the Lone Wanderer is some of the few things that make sense. However, his higher up, President Eden, who essentially his plan was not his own, but a copy of the previous Enclave leadership's, and also his tendency to self-destruct so easily makes no sense, as he acts with an air of superiority. However, none of his thoughts are original, they are just repackaged, like his plan. His inability to protect himself and to self-destruct instead is also problematic, as with this it causes issues with leadership and future leadership of the Enclave, considering he is so easily removed. And finally, your survival after fixing the water purifier. Considering the high levels of radiation in this being the cause of you needing to fix a water purifier, you should be dead, not napping for 2 weeks. So the questline after your father's death does not make sense. With the first part of the quest making sense, but the next 2 parts not making sense, this ultimately means the main quest in Fallout 3 does not make sense. So let me know in the comments, do you think the main questline in Fallout 3 makes sense? If you enjoyed watching this video, then you will enjoy this one. It is about the Enclave in Fallout 3 and whether or not they are really that evil.